Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandham at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order.
The number 24 is a special jersey number in the NFL's history, especially for defensive backs. In this edition of the Football by Numbers on 24s, we have historian Dana Auguster joining us once again to find the top 24s in NFL history. This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. This is your host, Darren Hayes, and we're podcasting from the Pigpen on America's North Shore, bringing you the memories of the gridiron one day at a time. So with Gene and Mike Monroe, as well as Jason Neff supplying us with the great tunes, let's go no huddle through today's top stories of American football history.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com, and welcome once again to the Pig Pen. Today on the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch podcast, we are proud to present the very special bonus edition of the Football by Numbers, where we're going to look at the top players in NFL history that wore the number 24. Joining us for this quest is my fellow Sports History Network partner, Dana Auguster, host of the Historically Speaking podcast. Dana, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, man, thanks for having me, man. I'm very honored and flattered to be back here. And I'm just getting back my clothes from the dry cleaners from the last time I was here in the Pig Pen. But I appreciate it. I like being here.
Well, we're sure glad to have you, and we're very appreciative you're here. And I know our listeners cannot get the visual of you, but Dana came on, and we're looking at each other through a Zoom call, and he has got a Pittsburgh Pirates hat on, and tells me he is a big Pirates fan, and that really got the ball rolling. I knew I liked Dana. I like him even more now.
I've been a Pirates fan ever since I was little, and when I first started watching baseball, that was like the team to watch, and that was the Pittsburgh Pirates. And it's interesting you brought that up, because I didn't mention this while we were talking before we came on, but the next podcast that I'm working on, we will be talking about the 1971 Pirates, who stands in baseball history as the first baseball team to field an all-black and Hispanic lineup. And I'm going to be talking about that in this week's podcast that's on right now. So when you get a chance, hit me up on the Historically Speaking Sports podcast. Hit me up right here on the Sports History Network, and you check it out.
Well, I know I'm definitely going to as soon as we get done recording here. I'm going to check that out. But yeah, folks, go right over there, check his out. And even some of his past episodes, they are just filled with history. And Dana does a great job of hitting social media every day with multiple posts of, appropriate for the day sports history of all sports. And it's just a great thing. We really enjoy it.
I appreciate you having me. Once again, I love that. That's like a passion of mine, and that's something that I try to do every day religiously. And sometimes I find some things. Sometimes I have to really dig for some, but most of the time, hey, I'm there.
All right, man. We're right with you. Well, we have a tough challenge today, my friend, because we are going to look at the 101 years of NFL history now, and we're going to look at the greatest players that wore the jersey number 24. And there is really a lot of good players on here. And the Hall of Fame sort of starts us off. And I'm going to run through real quickly who the Hall of Fame is telling us that wore number 24 that's enshrined in Canton. And that's Willie Brown, Champ Bailey, Willie Wood, Charles Woodson, Ty Law, Lenny Moore, Jack Christensen, and Johnny Blood McNally. And I don't think I missed anybody there, but maybe that's a good place for us to start off and just at least talk about some of these great players that really played for a long time with number 24 on also.
But there are a great bevy of great players. They wore the number 24 throughout history. While I was doing my research, I was surprised to see as many that wore the number 24. Going all the way back to Johnny Blood McNally and Jack Christensen in the 1950s, all the way up to present day players. Well, sort of present day. Marshawn Lynch, he's retired, but he's pretty modern, I guess you would say. A whole lot of Charles Woodson, who just recently was inducted into the Hall, a whole lot of different players, and a lot of players that's not so famous that I would like to touch on a little bit for my own personal reasons, I guess you could say.
Well, we want to touch all of them because if they were substantial and they were the number 24, we want to talk about them because we want to find the 10 greatest players that wore that number 24, and it's a tall task. I know because there's so many good ones, and you hate to leave anybody out. But if we got to go extend that list, we will, because it might be one of those cases where we might have to.
Oh yeah, we may have to, because of looking at some of these guys that's on the list, that's outside of those Hall of Famers. You'd be hard pressed to try to squeeze 10 into that bevy of 10. So we'll see where the night takes us.
Okay. Where do you want to start? Let's start with our Hall of Famers first. We'll start talking about them. I'll let you pick one of those to talk about, and we'll start our study here. Okay.
The first one I want to talk about is a little bit personal for me, because when I was 11 years old, I was playing Pee Wee football. I guess in Pennsylvania, y'all call it Little Gritters.
Yeah, we call it a bunch of different things. So
okay, but I was 11 and playing, and they had me playing running back, a small, undersized running back, mainly used on third down. And one of the coaches, since saw that I could catch the ball out of the backfield pretty well, so he was like, "You're gonna be out of Lenny Moore." Now, as an 11-year-old kid playing in the early 1980s, I had no idea who Lenny Moore was. And as luck would have it, like maybe 3 weeks or so later, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a show on ESPN that came on every Monday night called The Men Who Played the Game, hosted by Steve Sable. And as luck would have it, they did like a little small thing on Lenny Moore. I was so impressed by him that I was like, now I see what they're talking about. And I was so impressed by him with his moves and his speed and his catching ability. The one play that sticks out with me with Lenny Moore was that Johnny Unitas threw a pass to him in the back corner of the end zone against the Lions in a playoff game, I want to say. And he caught this ball diving in the back of the end zone. And my mouth was just like open, like, how he caught that, and he explained it and everything, and how it was like a higher power that enveloped him, where he was able to catch that ball from Unitas. And it was an incredible play. So Lenny Moore is a person who I like to start off with.
Okay. Yeah, he is definitely an interesting character to look at.
One thing I remember about him was the way he would tape up his shoes, like in a spat style, like marching bands, because he would tape outside of his cleats, which he was like one of the first people to ever do that. And I was like, this is the dude I want to be like. And he pretty much set the tone for a lot of the running backs in the 80s, like Roger Craig, and even further along down the line of guys like LaDainian Tomlinson, guys who could catch the ball equally as well as running the ball between the tackles and the outside.
Yeah, most definitely. He's got an interesting statistic. Most of his career, he was listed as a right halfback or just a halfback. But he had 1 year in the middle of his career, 1963. He was listed as the left end, and he didn't have a whole lot of games, so he must have had some injury. But if you look at his career stats, he has 5,174 rushing yards and 6,039 receiving yards. So that tells you that they were swinging the ball to him quite a bit from Unitas.
Well, you look at that offense that they had with Unitas running the show. You had Lenny Moore, and then you had Raymond Berry on the outside. I think you had Jim Mutchler at the tight end. You had some weapons there, and they were just incredible to just watch. And I know they caused a lot of problems, especially with dual threat like Lenny Moore.
I had Upton Bell, who on a couple months ago, and Upton was the player personnel of the 1960s Colts. So he was on the Colts when the player personnel when they played the Jets in Super Bowl III and when they won Super Bowl V. Lenny Moore was on both those teams, and he just was really said that's his favorite team of all time, that he was close to. And remember, his father was Burt Bell, who owned the Philadelphia Eagles and the Pittsburgh Steelers for years and years. And he was also with the Patriots for a little bit. But he loved those 1960s Baltimore Colts, especially the offense, very endearing to him. And Lenny Moore is one of those players he really enjoyed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I could easily see that. And he also, he's still living. He's still part of I think he's still around. And he just seemed like he's just a tremendous, tremendous person, from what I've read about him.
Absolutely. Just to follow up on his stats, he had 63 rushing touchdowns and 48 receiving touchdowns. Pretty well balanced on the yardage and the scoring. Just a dual threat, definitely.
Yeah, especially during that period of time when you ran the ball way more than you threw it, and having basically the balance between rushing touchdowns and receiving touchdowns is just incredible, especially during the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's definitely a great one to bring up. Where do you want to go to next with our Hall of Famers?
Now, I would be remiss if I did not mention the second guy on our list, and because my dad would pretty much kill me if I didn't mention him. My dad is a hardcore Raiders fan, and my dad calls him the Gentleman Raider, and we're talking about, of course, Willie Brown. Now, when you talk about defensive backs, he's the first defensive back that we're going to talk about, and when you talk about DBs, you talk about if you pretty much make your career if you have a pick six in a postseason game, if you just have one. Some really good ones have two. This man has three. Okay.
Yeah.
And one was against the Dolphins in 1970. Greasy threw a pass on the outside. I think it was either to Marv Fleming or might have been Paul Warfield on a muddy track at the Oakland Coliseum against Miami. He took it to the house. The second one, I know you're the host, and I know this is your show, but I have to break it to you. He victimized Terry Bradshaw once in 1973, threw a pass on the outside, tried to get it to Preston Pearson, and he took it to the house against him in the 73 divisional playoffs to bring them to the AFC Championship game that year. And, of course, the third one was against the Minnesota Vikings in Super Bowl 11, where he took it to the house to pretty much clinch their first Super Bowl win. So Willie Brown was the Gentleman Raider. He was, the one Raider that didn't really trash talk a lot, unlike the guys like Atkinson and Jack Tatum and Lester Hayes and those guys. But Willie Brown was probably, of all of those DBs that the Raiders had, he was probably the most cerebral, the most intelligent, and he may not have been the most athletic, but he definitely had a mind for the game that was fit right into that scheme that Madden was preaching in the late 60s, early 70s.
Most definitely. Now, I talked to John Turney at the Pro Football Journal, and he has got some really outstanding stats that I've never seen before. You got to check it out. It's a really good site, profootballjournal.com. And on Willie Brown, we have some stats that, we know he has 54 interceptions, 204 games played. His passes defense was 302 is what John has down, and 513 total tackles, both solo and combination tackles. Just a great all-around player. And like you said, those 3 touchdowns off the picks, those are some great numbers.
Yeah, Willie. I mean, like I said, my dad's a big Raider fan, and some of the big arguments that I would hear when I was growing up between my dad, who's a Raiders fan, and my godfather, who was a big Giants fan, they used to go back and forth on who was better between him and someone you're probably going to be talking about a little bit later on, Spider Lockhart for the Giants. Who was better? And they used to have big knockdown, drag out discussions about that, arguments or whatever you want to call it. But I call it discussions because it was Christmas time. Anyway, But yeah, Willie Brown is right up there as far as like the greatest, one of the greatest. I think I put him up in the top 2 as greatest ever to wear number 24.
I don't just totally disagree with you either, but let's. I think that we can probably lock him into our list here. I'll put him on the list right now. We'll give him a spot on that.
And one last thing about Willie Brown, he went to Grambling State University, which is my arch rival of my alma mater, Southern University. So I have to throw that in there.
Well, it seems like the last time you were on with numbers, we had a few of your arch rivals from Grambling.
Yes,
Coach Eddie Robinson was coaching them up over there.
You know it. We got to give all respect to, in my opinion, the greatest HBCU head coach ever, and that's Eddie Robinson.
Absolutely. Okay, where do we want to go next? You want to stay on the Hall of Fame DBs?
Yeah, another Hall of Fame DB, like I said, I just mentioned, who just entered the Hall of Fame not too long ago, and that's Charles Woodson. Played for the Raiders as well as the Packers, got a Super Bowl ring with the Packers. Another knockdown DB, won the Heisman Trophy, which is something that you don't normally see a DB winning. He was, a hard hitter, but at the same time, he was also a ball hawk. So he's basically a complete total package for a DB. He could hit, he could tackle, very fundamentally sound, but he also could defend passes and pick off passes when need to.
Now, this is an amazing stat, going to the Pro Football Journal on this. He had 65 interceptions in 254 games, 205 passes defense. But this next stat was just astounding me because it blew everybody away. That's on the number 24. He had 1,205 tackles. He's the only 4-digit tackler that I had of this group of DBs wearing the number 24.
He was an outstanding tackler, even when he was at the University of Michigan. He was an outstanding tackler. He wasn't afraid to get his nose dirty. That was definitely true with him. But Charles Woodson is one of the all-time greats, and I think that as time goes on, that people are going to start to realize how great of a DB he was and how important to the game he was, with his tackling and everything, trying to develop the next line of great defensive backs to come through the league. And he's going to be one of those guys that a lot of the newer DBs that's coming into the league are going to look at and say, I want to be like that guy. A lot of the guys that's coming in, he's going to try to emulate over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I had Oz Davis on last week with the number 21s, and we talked quite a bit about Charles, and Deion Sanders was on that list with the 21s too. And we talked about them not only for their defensive prowess, but they both played a little bit of offense, and they were great special teams, especially in return game. They were just outstanding. But Charles Woodson was, he was probably one of your modern two-way players, if we have that anymore. But him and Deion both, we could say that about.
Yeah. That's one thing that I kind of forget about with him, that he was a two-way player. That just gives you an idea. And you have to be an athlete to play defensive back. I tried it. I attempted to as I was in high school, but didn't play all that well. But still in all, playing DB is something that is very, very, difficult. You have to have a thick skin, and you have to have athleticism. And that's something that Charles Woodson had in abundance during his time with the Packers and the Raiders.
Absolutely. And he's another one that I think he should get an automatic place on this list. And we'll make your dad proud, because that's 2 Raiders we're putting on this list so far.
Yeah. Because like I said, if I don't, I'm gonna have to hear about it. But anyway, because he listens to everything I do. So,
well, there you go. You're going to be the favorite son this week, because you have his favorite team. First 2 players on the board.
There you go.
All right.
Next guy I want to go to is Willie Wood of the Green Bay Packers.
Okay.
Who was the backbone of that great defensive, can you imagine the quarterbacks that in the 60s that had to go on one side? You had Willie Wood, on the other side, Herb Adderley.
Yeah, that's a tough game there.
That's something to deal with, and of course, the Packers were hard-nosed, ground attacking. Everybody talks about the running game and their offense with Bart Starr. But not too many people talk about their defense. They talk about Nitschke and they talk about the others, but they don't talk about the defensive backfield. And Willie Wood was the anchor of that backfield along with Herb Adderley. But Willie Wood, you could match him up with anybody, and he would basically shut them down. You don't really hear too much about him being that quote unquote shutdown corner. but he was just as good as anybody during that era, as shutting down their main receiver. And not to mention you have Adderley on the other side, which is, impressive to say the least. And I know he caused a lot of problems and gave a lot of headaches to quarterbacks and offensive coordinators during that time.
Oh, absolutely. Now, I had, Pro Football Journal, John Turney had a nice little write-up on Willie Wood. We lost him last year, I believe it was. He passed away. But John Turney has a real nice description for our younger listeners that may not appreciate him. In just these 2 sentences, he says, for the first 5 years of his career, Willie Wood was a dynamite punt returner and also a kickoff specialist at times, too. He led the NFL in picks in 1962 and wears 5 NFL championship rings with those Green Bay Packers. Just some great words from John Turney about him.
Yeah, I mean, the Packers were just loaded with athletes, on both sides of the ball, but you don't really know about it or realize it because simply the type of offense and the type of games that they played didn't really warrant a lot of athleticism. They just beat you just by sheer force and fundamentals, and which is the basics, which is basically the backbone of any great NFL team. The flashiness and the swagger and everything that comes later on, of course. But how good were those Green Bay Packers? Especially on that back half of that secondary, back half of that defense with those two, especially with Adderley and Wood in the backfield. And Wood didn't he have the very first interception in Super Bowl history?
He could have. I'm not sure. I
remember him picking off a pass against Dawson in that third quarter in Super Bowl I. I think it might have been the very first pass intercepted in Super Bowl history. And he brought it all the way back to like the inside the 5, which basically broke the game open. I believe that was him.
It could be. It's like you said, though, they had a lot of good stars in that defensive backfield for the Packers in those days. They were just some great teams. But Willie Wood, here's a quote from Raymond Berry that played against Willie Wood quite a bit. And he goes, Willie gave the Packers the ability to call one defense and get many interceptions off it. He smells a play, he takes off on his own and breaks up a play he should have never been near. That's from one of the top receivers of the NFL at that time in Raymond Berry.
Raymond Berry was probably one of those sneaky types. He was, for the younger listeners, Raymond Berry, if I had to compare him to somebody now, it would probably be somebody like Julian Edelman or Wes Welker type of guy. Not fast, not overly big, but just so precise with his routes that he would just get open so easily. And he's a Hall of Famer. And Willie Wood and Raymond Berry and those Colt-Packer rivalry games during the 1960s were just epic. And those two going head to head, I would pay just to watch just that matchup with those two.
Yeah, absolutely. And Unitas slinging the ball. That had to be a special treat for the fans in those days. I wish I could have been old enough to enjoy it myself. Okay, well, I think you convinced me there. I think Willie Wood ought to be on our list too. So that takes up 3 of our spots here so far. We've got Lenny Moore off on the side here for right now, but those 3 DBs are just outstanding, and I think they definitely deserve spots on there.
Yeah. Now, next one I want to go to is someone that is from my neck of the woods, where I am now, which is Georgia. Played at the University of Georgia, went to the Denver Broncos, a man by the name of Champ Bailey. And I remember watching him in college, being a kid, grew up in the South, watched SEC football. I remember when he first came to Georgia and moved on to the Denver Broncos. And he was another shutdown corner, but didn't really get a whole lot of notoriety because he was just such a solid player. He's in the Hall of Fame, if I'm not mistaken. And
yes, he is.
And he was just a solid defensive back, especially for, those Denver Bronco teams in the early 2000s, and he was just such a solid defensive back, but you never really heard too much about him, but he would never, I don't recall ever hearing him really get beat on a play. just flat out just beaten by a receiver. He's so fundamentally sound, so athletically gifted. And he was just such of a brainy player doing his career in the NFL, which wasn't that long ago. He just, with him being in the Hall of Fame, like, wow, he's been out of the league that long, but he's played like for a lot of years, I believe.
Yeah, he played from 1999 to 2013, 15 seasons. Started off with Washington, was part of that big blockbuster trade that the Redskins and the Broncos had, and they switched the running back. Escapes my name right now.
Clinton
Portis, yes, he was. I think that was a 1-for-1 trade on there, but it was a big trade at the time, and it worked out well for both teams and for both players. So they both had success.
Yeah. But Champ Bailey, again, was a shutdown corner when he was at Georgia. I remember watching him when they used to terrorize LSU. But that's another story. Champ Bailey was just an unbelievable, solid defensive back for a lot of years in the National Football League.
Absolutely. And I forgot, I should mention now, probably you got the credit for mentioning the two Raiders, but now talking about a Denver Bronco, Pops probably took away a gold star from you now. But Champ Bailey is that good. He needs to be talked about, the 24s. Just some Pro Football Reference numbers. He had 52 interceptions in 215 games, 205 passes defense, 908 tackles. So another good tackler.
Yeah, I mean, he fits right into that mold with Charles Woodson. He's sort of like that same type of guy, same basic body build, same basic style. Was an outstanding tackler. I don't remember anybody once he got a hold of you, that was pretty much it. You wasn't really going to go anywhere with him. And he was just such of a great, great defensive back, such a solid performer, for those Denver Bronco teams. You say he got there in 99, if I'm not correct. If I'm correct, got there.
Yeah, 99 is when he came into the NFL, so he had to be with Washington in 1999.
So I was thinking that he might have had a Super Bowl ring, that last Super Bowl team with Elway, but he wasn't. So I thought he did for some reason, but. Right, because 99, that sounds about right when he left, when he graduated and came to the NFL out of Georgia. So, yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, that's right. Because I thought he might have had a Super Bowl ring with the Broncos, doing that. But he was in that time period, like after Elway, but before Manning. So,
right, yeah, he left Washington. He played for Washington in 2003, 2004. He played for Denver all the way to 2013. So 10 years with the Broncos.
Right. Exactly. Okay, gotcha.
Now, what do you think about him? Should we give him a spot on that list, or do you want to come back to him?
I'll come back to him because there's a couple others, that I think that are deserving. But Champ Bailey is basically you kind of like to pencil him in as a possible. You could actually erase it, but just pencil him in as a finalist for the top 10.
All right, we'll put him back so he'll be one of those people we'll come back to and talk about and deliberate about to see if we can convince one another if he should be on or not.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we have a couple more DBs that are in the Hall of Fame that we probably ought to talk about. How about Ty Law? He wore the number for 13 seasons.
Ty Law, Mr. I fought the law and the law won. A little ESPN reference there. Ty Law, New England Patriots defensive back, was basically the defensive captain of that team with that very first Belichick Super Bowl run with him, Willie McGinnis, Brewski, and those guys. He was like the linchpin of those great in the early dynasty Patriots, and wasn't he part of the Parcells Patriots team too that went to the Super Bowl against Green Bay?
I believe he may have been. 95 is when he came in the league with New England. I think Parcells might have been there then.
Yeah, I think because they went in 96, 97, because I was still in college when they played in New Orleans. I was actually in New Orleans for the Super Bowl. I didn't go to the game, but the game was in New Orleans, and I was around the Superdome doing that Super Bowl. That's the only Super Bowl I didn't necessarily see on TV, but I was in the vicinity of the dome. So, Ty Law, another kind of on the smallish side as far as like a DB is concerned, but he made up for it with his athleticism. I know he had a lot of interceptions. If I'm not mistaken, he may have the Patriots record for interceptions in a career. Either it might have been him or Michael Haynes, but I think it's Ty Law that has the Patriots record for most interceptions in a career. Which is impressive considering the number of DBs that came out of New England with, Maurice Hurst and, his name escapes me at the moment, but there's a couple
Claiborne. Claiborne was what?
Yeah, exactly. That's who I was thinking about. But yeah, I mean, they had some great DBs, and I think he has the team record for most interceptions as a Patriot. And, I don't know if Patriots retire numbers, but that number 24 for the red, white, and blue for those New England Patriots teams should go up there in the rafters over there at Gillette Stadium. He's definitely deserving.
Yeah, his numbers, according to Pro Football Journal, 53 interceptions for his total career with all the teams he played for. He had a couple stints with the Jets and the Kansas City, I believe, after the Patriots. 203 total games, 165 passes defenses, 838 tackles. Another great tackler from the cornerback position.
He's very hard-nosed tackler from what I remember of Ty Law playing in the AFC East. Once upon a time, you used to call it the AFC least, but that's another story for another day. But the AFC East with those, right at the time when the Dolphins were kind of like on the decline, the Bills were on the decline, and the Jets were kind of like, trying to get something started. But Law was the anchor of that defense with Teddy Bruschi and McGinnis and those guys. So, Ty Law was just another solid, doable, durable defensive back for those Patriot teams.
Most definitely, and another Hall of Famer from the defensive back. I'm going to put him on our standby list also because he's got some comparable numbers to Champ Bailey and some of the other guys we're going to talk about here too that aren't in the Hall of Fame, and we might have a good discussion on him.
Mm-hmm.
All right. How about another defensive back that's in the Hall of Fame, Jack Christensen, a great old-time player there too.
Going old school on me, 1950s, Jack Christensen, three-time NFL champ with the Detroit Lions in the 50s, 46 picks over in his career. Three-time NFL champ with the Lions, one back-to-back, with those great Bobby Lane, Dick Night Train Lane Lions teams, I think. Mm-hmm. With him and Night Train Lane, one thing about it that you're going to get, if you're going to catch a pass over the middle against either one of these two guys, you are going to get hit. You're going to like it because they were two hard-nosed defensive backs playing in a hard-nosed, gritty city in Detroit and playing at Tiger Stadium or Brick Stadium at the time. And you play a game over there in December and January, and that rock hard dirt surface of the old Tiger Stadium, you're gonna feel it when you hit the ground. You're gonna feel it from them, and you're gonna feel it from when you hit the ground. Another great old time football stadium, at Brick Stadium. But Jack Christensen, didn't he go into broadcasting after his career?
He may have. I'm not that familiar with his broadcasting career. I don't remember him doing exactly, but he very well could have.
And also, I think, isn't he, now I may be stretching here, but I'm thinking that he is the father of Todd Christensen, the former tight end of the Raiders.
That's a possibility too. I'm not sure.
I think, I remember hearing somewhere that Todd Christensen, if he's elected, they could be the first father-son duo in the Hall of Fame, possibly. Again, wow. It may be a reaching or whatever, but I'm just curious about that because when I was doing my research, I tried to figure out, are they related somehow? Because that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, it definitely would be. It would be. I'll do some research on as we're talking here. But you talked about the Detroit. You talk about Oakland and the Packers defensive backfield at the time. How about the Detroit Lions at the time? You had Jack Christensen, Dick Night Train Lane, two of the greatest defensive backs ever. And Dick LeBeau was a defensive back too, who had a lot of interceptions in that Detroit Lions backfield of the defense too. So,
and I think while we're talking about it, I would be remiss if we didn't mention the network's godfather, Artie Chapman, who's a big Lions fan. I know this part, he's going to probably rewind back and forth, but I got to give credit where credit is due. Those Lions teams in the 50s was as hard-nosed as you could possibly have. I mean, this was a very, very hard-nosed football team. And it's a shame that they haven't won more because of, for whatever reason, maybe it's the Bobby Lane curse, who knows, but which is an urban legend. But again, they've had so many great players over the years, they just could never put it together. But those teams in the 50s that seem to go head to head with the Browns every year for an NFL championship, that was like one of the underground rivalries in NFL history, Cleveland and Detroit. And you talk about two hard-nosed cities, two hard-nosed teams, and Christensen fit right into that mold of the tough, hard-nosed, hardcore, defense with guys like Schmidt. That was just the bedrock of that defense of the 1950s. Joe Schmidt, I couldn't remember his first name, but Joe Schmidt, Hall of Famer. Hardcore, hard-nosed defense over there, with Dick LeBeau with the interceptions and Dick Night Train Lane with the necktie. Just hard-nosed, old school, knuckles in the dirt football, which I love.
Oh, absolutely. It had to be quite the games to watch. Those guys hitting at it. I think he's another one that I would suggest that he should probably go on the list because
I think so too. I mean, with 3 world championships under his belt with the Lions playing alongside Dick Night Train Lane, with those great teams in Detroit, you have to put him on that list of the greatest to wear number 24.
Absolutely. So we have 4 spots taken up. And just a reminder who we have: Willie Brown, Willie Wood, Charles Woodson, and Jack Christensen are their first 4 spots that we have taken up on our top 10 list of the greatest number 24s in NFL history. Okay, we have, let's see, it looks like one Hall of Famer that we have not talked about yet and probably won't talk much on because we've spent a lot of time on some other numbers, and that's Johnny Blood McNally. Johnny Blood only wore the number 24 for 2 seasons. Looks like 1929, 1930 is what I have him down as.
Yeah, with the Green Bay Packers. Yes. He wore it with the Green Bay Packers for those 2 years. And, he was, again, played halfback, but, we talked about him before or at least you have on your show, and you've been really deep down into his career, and I love listening to him and how he got the name Johnny Blood. That's just a cool name, Johnny Blood. It really is.
Yeah, we had Warren Rogan on one of the programs that Johnny Blood was on, and he just had some excellent story on how he got that name. So make sure you go back and listen to that. I think it was number 10 or 11 that we had him on with Warren Rogan, and great stories that Warren told about him.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm not sure that Johnny Blood's going to make our list though, with only 2 years and so many other great players. And Johnny's made some other lists with his number. So I'm going to probably say we're going to take him out of consideration for this because there's so many other good players we haven't even talked about that aren't in the Hall of Fame. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I kind of I do agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. Now, if we want to, do you want to stay on topic of the defensive backs? Because we have some defensive backs that are not in the Hall of Fame yet, but had some great careers and were the number 24 for a while. I'm thinking about, Darrelle Revis and Everson Walls in particular.
Well, Everson Walls, I remember watching him as a kid, because we caught a lot of Dallas Cowboy games growing up in Louisiana, and it seemed like every pass that they tried to test Everson Walls with, either he got an interception or he knocked it away. That was the one defensive back on the Cowboys. Even though you had Dennis Thurman on the other side, you had Everson Walls there that was just so incredibly durable and just absolute just terror defensively for those Cowboys, for that secondary of the Cowboys in the late 70s, early 80s, mainly the 80s. But he just seemed like, when I was a kid, it seemed like every time somebody tried to test him on that outside, either he got an interception or he just knocked the ball down. It seemed like every time. I know it wasn't every time, but it just seemed like that as a kid just learning the game of football, watching him.
Well, let's look at the numbers from Pro Football Journal. 57 interceptions in 186 games, 207 passes defense. So you did see quite a few of those, and 759 tackles.
Yeah, Everson Walls was just a beast on the outside. You know, like in Dallas in the early '80s had like a really good defensive secondary. You know, and they were just snake bit in the playoffs. You know, victimized by the Eagles and then the 49ers and that sort of thing. But there was just that defensive secondary was I would put that up against anybody's defensive secondary, especially during that era of football when passing was still kind of at a premium, but people were starting to throw the ball a little bit more, and it wasn't as physical, but still it was still kind of a type of game that that you saw was starting to evolve into more of a passing game that we see today.
Yeah, the Cowboys were sort of in a tough spot there in the 80s when Everson Wall played, because you had to contend with the 49ers, who were at the top of their game with Bill Walsh and company, and Joe Montana and Steve Young for a little bit. And you had the Giants on the rise. Bill Parcells came in and brought LT and Phil Simms, and they were in their division. So that was a tough era to be a Cowboy. And even though they had good teams, it was tough for them to get up into that Super Bowl and win it.
Yeah. I remember, like I said, I remember watching those games. My neighbor, who was a big Dallas Cowboys fan, and watching him, watch those games with him, and just being so disappointed that when they lost, when we were kids, I used to laugh at him, but he used to come back to where at least I'm there. At least the Cowboys are there. Where are your Chargers? I'm like, okay, but never mind.
Yeah, that's hard to do that smack talk when your team's not supporting you,
Yeah, that's right. I've been there a number of times. Trust me.
Okay, I'm going to put Everson Wall on our standby list too, because he's an interesting character. Yeah. Now Revis is on there, and I was kind of surprised at Revis's numbers compared to all these other great cornerbacks and safeties that we talked about. Darrelle Revis in his career only had 29 interceptions, 145 games, a lot less games than everybody else, 140 passes defense, 497 tackles. But there's probably some pretty good reason why his numbers were down so much compared to the others.
People were trying to stay away from Revis Island. That's what that was.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was, I think he was like the one player where his reputation preceded him. Great player. I mean, it wasn't that he wasn't just a good player just by, people talking. He was a great player, period. But his reputation was, we're going to stay away from him, but not too many people tested him. But when they did test him, they found maybe he can get some success. The one thing that I remember watching about him was that he wasn't as sure of a tackler as you would want to have as a DB that has that type of reputation. You catch a pass, like I've seen guys catch a pass on a quick slant in front of him, and he hits them, but doesn't wrap up all the time. And that was his knock. That you can catch passes on him, just don't try to test him deep and don't test him often. Because he was one of those guys that you may catch 2 or 3 on him in the beginning of the game, but don't go to him like in the fourth quarter, because he can't shut you down, because he was just that brainy of a player. Yeah, he may not have had the brawn of some other defensive backs, but Darrelle Revis had the intellect that could figure out a defense, that could figure out an offense, diagnose a pass route that may be coming from a certain receiver, and could just jump that route and just victimize you at the end of a game, much less in the first part of a game. He's just trying to figure you out. So that was his forte of his being just a brainy type defensive back. Yeah,
he just had that sixth sense to, figure out where a quarterback's can go with the ball. Estimated the routes of receivers, and he could jump them, and had that real quick speed, just a makeup speed to contend on passes. Just a great player, great defender.
Right,
like you said, quarterbacks did not throw his way very often. That's why his numbers are so much lower than some of the other guys we talked about.
Right.
Okay, we'll put Darrell on the standby list also here with the others. Now, there's another defensive back that's kind of an interesting one, and actually the Pro Football Journal has it as one of their top cornerbacks of all time. They have like a list of like 35, and Gary Green makes that list of being one of the top cornerbacks. Do you have anything on Gary Green?
Well, not too much. I don't really know that much about Gary Green. Tell me about him.
Well, his numbers, according to the Pro Football Journal, he had 33 interceptions, 132 games he played, 131 passes defense, and 517 tackles. Now, he played from 1977 to 1983 in the league, and it was all with the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm sorry, 7 years with the Chiefs and 2 with the Rams at the end of his career.
Okay. But, I think the reason why I hadn't really known too much about Gary Green was that he played for the Chiefs, and I remember watching the Chiefs as a kid. Every now and then, we really didn't watch the Chiefs all that much growing up because being in the South and in the Midwest, I didn't catch a lot of Chiefs games growing up, but the name Gary, I mean, like now that I'm thinking about it, I'm starting to put the pieces together, and I do kind of remember that. But he was he was part of that, the Chiefs team with Joe Delaney and Jeff Fuller was a quarterback, and but they really had a lot of success during the time that he was there, from what I remember.
Yeah, they didn't have real strong teams, but he was a real solid player. Like I said, he doesn't really have the numbers to probably get up there with the other guys, but I thought he was definitely worth mentioning as we're talking about all these great DBs. There's some other ones in there that didn't really have super good numbers. Like Sean Springs is an interesting one to talk about. But it's about the same numbers as Gary Green. He had 33 interceptions, a couple touchdowns, pick sixes off of them, 169 games. A real solid player for Seattle and Washington at the end of his career with New England. But don't know that he makes the list like Gary Green.
Another corner that played for the Chiefs that you mentioned, and I don't think he's going to make the list. He probably won't make our list, but I just want to mention him, who has the coolest nickname of anybody to ever play defensive back, and that's Fred the Hammer Williamson. Fred, his career, first of all, he was basically a prototype defensive back for for this era of football, even though he played in the 60s. Because of his swagger and his trash talk, and of course he was the subject of sideline banter during Super Bowl I when he got knocked out of the game, and even though of all the trash that he talked before Super Bowl I, and he's became more famous after his career than during his career, I think, because he became an actor. He was in a number of action movies during the 1970s, and not to mention that nickname, the Hammer. And that was just somebody that he was like one of the first actors that I learned played pro football when I was a kid, watching some of his movies. And I thought that I just wanted to just mention Fred the Hammer Williamson. Now, he probably won't make our list, but it was just somebody I just wanted to mention.
Yeah, definitely. That's what we want to do. We want to make sure we're preserving that football history and mentioning some of these guys. The other two defensive backs, they're basically safeties I have one's a safety, one's a corner. I have Adrian Wilson, who is, I'm not sure that he's going to make the list, but what a great player Adrian Wilson was, most of his career with the Cardinals in Arizona. And, he ended up for his career, 27 interceptions from the safety spot. Not too bad. 2 pick sixes, 508 return yards off those interceptions. He's a good one. And another one that's a contemporary is still playing is Stephon Gilmore. Again, I'm not sure his numbers are going to get him in to the conversation of our top 10, but he has had 9 years wearing the number 24, 25 interceptions and 2 pick sixes.
Yeah, I mean, Stephon Gilmore he's a very talented defensive back right now. If you give us another about maybe 2 or 3 years, he may end up on the list. He could very well end up on the list in about another 2 or 3 years. Very, very solid defensive back for New England. Instrumental in a couple of AFC playoff games a couple of years ago, from what I remember. Came up with a big play a couple of years ago. I remember the play, but I don't remember who they exactly were. I think they were playing Baltimore, might have been. He came up with a big interception late in the game to seal the win for New England. But Stephon Gilmore, just a great, outstanding defensive back. Another one that's in the mold of that Charles Woodson type.
Absolutely. And I would be remiss, and I almost forgot about this gentleman because he definitely needs mentioned too, is Rosie Taylor of the 1960s. Chicago Bears is where he most famously wore the number 24 with, but he had 32 interceptions. Remember, this is 1960s, 486 yards of return, 3 pick sixes for the Chicago Bears.
Another team with just a bevy of great defense, a great bevy of defensive players, period. You had Rosie Taylor on one side. You had on the other side, J.C. Caroline. And, of course, terrorizing up the middle is from the University of Tennessee, Doug Atkins. And then plus, not to mention all of the linebackers and stuff that was part of those Bears teams that won the 63 championship. One thing that I've always would love to do, is impossible to do, but I would love to do one day, is figure out, and if they would have had the Super Bowl in 1963, could you imagine this study in contrast between the Monsters of the Midway defense of the Bears in the Super Bowl playing against the AFL champion San Diego Chargers with Hadel, Allworth, Lowe, Lincoln, Kusurik at tight end? One of the greatest offensive collections of star players ever in the history of pro football against the Monsters of the Midway. What would that matchup be like?
Oh, it would have been interesting to watch, that's for sure.
One side on the sideline, you had George Halas. The other sideline, Sid Gilman.
Right. Yeah. The passing offense coming to life against a team that just like to really run the ball and play good defense. That would have been an interesting matchup. You're right.
And then on defense, you had Ernie Ladd, you had Earl Faison, you had Chuck Allen, Charlie McNeil at defensive back. You had some really star power on both of those squads. And with the Bears, you had Billy Wade at quarterback, Mike Ditka at tight end, Willie Gallimore at running back. You had some really talented on both sides of that squad, on both sides of the ball, on both squads. So. Well, that would have been like a really cool first Super Bowl if they would have had it in 63.
Absolutely. It sure would have. Okay. I think that's about all the defensive backs and people on the defensive side of the ball that, there's a plethora of other ones, but the substantial players that really had an impact that would be under consideration. Do you have any others defensively before we get into the offensive guys?
Defensively, just a couple. I think one that you've left out, and I think you left them out on purpose, and that's Larry Brown of the Cowboys.
Oh yeah, oh boy, yeah. He had a great
Three
Super Bowl
interceptions
game
in the Super Bowl against your Steelers. I forgive you for trying to for leaving him out. That's okay. We know. I'm not gonna tell anybody. But 3 interceptions in the Super Bowl against the Steelers in Super Bowl 30 against Neil O'Donnell. Great career, but his career was kind of short, not that long. He had that one really great game against the Steelers in the Super Bowl on the biggest stage. Johnny Sample of the Jets. Mostly for the Jets. He played for the Steelers and the Redskins in the NFL, but the Jets in the AFL won a Super Bowl, won a championship with Super Bowl 3 as their defensive back. And one more, is Booker Edgerson. I'm an AFL guy, so Booker Edgerson played for the Bills and Broncos, won back-to-back AFL titles with the Bills as a defensive back. On the other side from Bobby Bird, another great defensive back. I think Edgerson was part of the All AFL team in the 1960s as a defensive back. I think second team All AFL. For the All AFL team, the All Decade team, I think it is, and just a great, solid player. You don't hear too much about those DBs from the AFL, but he was stuck out as like one of the really good ones, and won 2 AFL titles with the Bills. Of course, both of them against the Chargers. So hey, it is what it is. So we kind of even on that. I did mention Edgerson, and then we had our little moment of pain. So there we go.
and probably another DB worth mentioning that I sort of remiss on, and I'm glad you mentioned Larry Brown too, in the other gentleman you talked about. But Jonathan Joseph, who's just played even last year, 32 interceptions, 643 return yards, 7 touchdowns off of his interceptions. Pretty good numbers there. Not quite sure he's going to make our list. Made 2 Pro Bowls in his career, but still an interesting person to talk to. He had some substantial games on the defense.
Right. Exactly. Jonathan Joseph, played most of his career, played with the Texans, and I think also with the Bengals, I believe it was.
I just closed them up here. I think you're right. Definitely the Texans, and he did have another team before that. Cincinnati for 5 seasons. You're all over it.
Just another solid all around defensive back. I'm thinking with the Texans, I think in the process of having a fire sale down there. But Jonathan Joseph has been a solid DB for all of his career with Houston and Cincinnati.
Yeah. Okay. Most definitely. Okay, now why don't we switch over to the offensive side of things, because we have some really good players that played offense too that wore number 24. And,
right, exactly.
You started talking a little bit about Marshawn Lynch, and maybe we got to get a little bit more detail about his career.
Well, Marshawn Lynch, I'm going to tell you, if you notice behind me, there's a Saints poster or whatever behind me, and I have to put that in here because if I don't, my wife would kill me because I have to represent the Saints somewhere. And she was a Marshawn Lynch fan until Beastquake, where he broke every defensive tackle. He broke every tackle the Saints laid on him for like 70 some yards, which is like the signature moment of his career, which was a career loaded with signature moments. Started off with Buffalo, played a little while there, but he made his name with Seattle. Obviously, won a Super Bowl ring with the Seahawks. Just a power runner. Came from the University of California. Just an all-around, just great power runner, which is something that you really don't see too much of in the National Football League anymore.
Right, and you said that one Super Bowl probably should have had a second Super Bowl if they would have gave him the ball instead of throwing that pass at the end of the one Super Bowl against the Patriots.
I think people like Lombardi and Hallis and those guys were basically spinning in their graves like, why don't you run the ball in that situation on the 1 yard line? And you hadn't been able to stop the run all day. So that was one of the things that I was yelling at the TV about when I remember watching that Super Bowl. But yeah, Marshawn Lynch, like I said, my wife was a big fan of his until that moment. So when that moment happened against the Saints in that playoff game, that pretty much ended it for her.
Yeah, and his career was pretty elusive, but he ran for over 10,000 yards, 10,413 yards in his career, a 4.2 yard average, 85 touchdowns. Outstanding career for Beast Mode.
Yeah. Man, no doubt about it. I mean, he was played at the University of California. I think came right after Aaron Rodgers left to go to the NFL. I think that's when he started attending the University of California. That would have been. I think he was there also at the same time. I can't think of a receiver from the Eagles that attended Cal at the same time, but they had like a really loaded team at the University of California at that time, and Marshawn Lynch was just the linchpin of that offense. On any offense that he was, especially in Seattle, because if they wanted to, slow the game down, just give it to him, and he's going to break like 2 or 3 tackles, on every single play, and that's just such of a hard runner that he is.
Yeah, absolutely. We had another interesting back wore the number 24. How do you think about Freeman McNeil? He was another interesting one.
It's a wonder why the Jets never won more with that offense and Freeman McNeil in the backfield. Freeman McNeil is probably one of the most underrated running backs in the entire decade of the 80s. People don't remember Freeman McNeil that much because the Jets didn't have a lot of success, which is just a mystery to me on why they didn't. I was a big football fan during the 80s, watching them, and it just seemed like they lost playoff games that they had no business losing. And it wasn't Freeman McNeil's fault. I mean, he was just a solid running back for that Jets team in the 80s. But you had like a great defense with Gastineau and Marty Lyons and Joe Klecko and the New York Sack Exchange. And the offense was just stacked with so many great players. Wesley Walker and Al Toon with the receivers. Ken O'Brien was the quarterback. Fullback with Johnny Hector, who's from my hometown. Just an all around, just a stacked offense, but just for some reason just couldn't get it together in the playoffs. You had Mickey Schuler at tight end. Just an all around, just an outstanding team for the Jets, but they just for some reason just couldn't put it together in the postseason.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't Freeman McNeil's fault because he ended up having 8,074 rushing yards, 4.5 yards per carry, 38 touchdowns in his career. Great running back Freeman McNeil was for the Jets.
Yeah, man, no question about it. No question about it with Freeman McNeil. Sort of a tweener. He could juke you, but at the same time he can't run over you. So just a very serviceable running back. Could beat you any way. He could run through you or run around you. He had the speed to do it and the power to do it. Absolutely.
Okay. Who else do you have offensively that you'd like to talk about here that might make our list?
Another running back who probably can't make our list is Robert Smith of the Vikings. Was part of that team in the late 90s, Minnesota, those great Minnesota teams with Randall Cunningham at quarterback. And you had Randy Moss and Chris Carter, and he was the running back, toting the ball for them. Very, very good running back, very durable. We're actually not really all that durable because he did suffer a lot of injuries, and I think that his career would have been so much better, had he had more carries or more rushing yards, he would have had, he definitely would have made our list as far as like top 10. But Robert Smith was definitely a decent running back, better than a lot of people may remember, but he was often hampered by injuries from what I remember.
Didn't have him wearing a number 24. We talked about him on a previous edition. And I know he had the whole career with the Vikings. I'm trying to
about another Robert Smith then.
Yeah, he was number 20 for a little bit, but number 26 was his most famous number.
That's right. Yeah.
So yeah, that's why he may make the list, but wasn't wearing the number 24. I don't think so. Smith's a pretty common name though, so there probably was some other Robert Smiths in there, I'm sure.
But I'll give you another one. I don't think he's going to make our list as far as like top 10, but he had a very interesting trivia question with very interesting trivia, which is Mel Farr, another running back of the Lions in the late 60s, early 70s, wore number 24, power running back for the Lions. And the piece of trivia is what listed by Rolling Stone magazine. I'm a big music buff. Rolling Stone magazine had listed Marvin Gaye's album, What's Going On, is one of the greatest albums ever. On the title track, there's Marvin Gaye talking with 2 other guys right at the beginning of the song. Mel Farr and Lynn Barney were the two guys that he was talking to at the beginning of the song.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
And Marvin Gaye wanted to play football. He tried out for the Lions, actually. But luckily for us, music connoisseurs, he didn't make it. But Mel Farr was a great running back for the Lions in the 60s.
You know what? I think now you say that, we had Arnie Chapman on with the number 20s, and we talked about Lem Barney, and he did bring that up about Lem Barney being on Marvin Gaye's soundtrack for What's Going On. So, yeah, very interesting. The two arts, sports and the music arts are colliding here. Worlds colliding.
That's it. I'm a big music buff, and R&B and classic R&B and jazz are my two strong suits right there.
Well, you're definitely the sports and the trivia with the music. You're bringing those up like crazy here. I had another interesting one. I don't think he'll make the list, but Otis Armstrong is another running back that had some success in the league. He had 4,400 yards, over 4,400 yards rushing, 25 touchdowns. Really had a decent career in the 70s with the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, he was the running back after Floyd Little. And he was a feature back guy right after Floyd Little. He was kind of like that, kind of a scat back, kind of running back during that time. He was part of that Super Bowl team that made it to the Super Bowl against Dallas and New Orleans. He was on that team. So he was just such a great running back. Doing the Broncos years when they were just trying to figure out things.
Yes, I agree. Did you have anybody else you wanted to bring up before we go into our deliberations and come up with our top 10 here?
One more 24 who was a Super Bowl MVP wearing 24, but he wore another number for bulk of his career, and that's Otis Anderson.
Oh, yes. Yeah, Otis Anderson is another good one. Yes.
He played for the Cardinals for a long time, wore the number 32, but when he went to the Giants, got a Super Bowl ring in Super Bowl 25 wearing the number 24. Another power running back. Was the key cog in that Giants attack, winning Super Bowl 25, giving Parcells and the Giants their second Super Bowl.
Yes. Yeah, definitely another great back there to talk about. But I'm not sure that those backs like him and some of the other ones are going to make that list, because these DBs are pretty dominant in this.
With the number, that's a defensive back's number 24. That's a great DB number, 24.
Right. Okay. Well, let's go and review here. We've got 4 spots all tied up in our top 10. And we said that's Jack Christensen, Charles Woodson, Willie Wood, and Willie Brown. And some of the guys that we said we were going to come back around to, Champ Bailey, Ty Law, Darrelle Revis, Lenny Moore, Everson Walls, and Marshawn Lynch is some we might come back to here. So let's see how many that is. Is that more than 6? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's like 7 of them. So basically, we're going to eliminate one of those names to get to our top 10, is what it looks like.
Okay. I think Lenny Moore should be on the list.
I agree with you there.
I definitely think Lenny Moore should be on that list. Also, Marshawn Lynch.
Okay, I agree with that one too. So there is 6 of them. We have 4 more names to come up with that. I'll give you those names again. Everson Walls, Revis, Law, and Champ Bailey. I think Champ Bailey probably ought to be on the list.
Yeah, I do agree with that as well as Ty Law. I do agree with Ty Law getting on that list as well.
Okay, that gives us 8. And, well, you know what? Looks like everybody, maybe my count was wrong, because I 2 spots left and I have 2 X's still there. So that's Revis and Everson Walls would be our 9th and 10th, it looks like.
Yeah.
So I don't see anybody else we talked about. I'm sorry about that. I gave you a wrong count. We did have 10 and we didn't know it.
All right. Math wasn't my strong suit either, so so don't feel bad.
Well, hey, I think we did it. That was a good discussion, and we really got some good players on there for that top 10 list. And
I really do agree with that. That this top 10 list is right up there. Great number 24s, and fittingly on March 24th. So.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, that's the day we're recording this. So yes, it'll be coming out a little bit later than that, right before Easter, we hope. Now, let's talk about the Historically Speaking podcast. You alluded to it a little bit of what you got some good things cooking here, getting ready to come up. Why don't you share with the listeners what they can expect and can tune into for Historically Speaking?
Well, I mean, Historically Speaking is my show that I put together pretty much, not necessarily on the fly. I have like ideas that I bump around in my head that I normally put together. But and my Twitter feed is basically what fuels the show. Whatever I put on Twitter, which is important for you to check out, by the way, which is Historically SP2 on Twitter. My show is my Twitter feed basically drives the show as far as content is concerned. And I would pick like one thing during that week that I would like to focus on as far as like the main event on the top 5 and the shout out. This week is on the show that's on this week is the show is basically my baseball opening day special. And like I alluded to before, the Pirates having the first all black Hispanic lineup happened 50 years ago this year. It happened September 1st, 1971 at Three River Stadium. I believe it was against the Mets. And I wanted to highlight that since this is the 50th anniversary of that. And plus it was on their way to the Pirates' 4th World Series victory. Later that year, they ended up beating Baltimore in 7 games. And that was the Roberto Clemente Showcase World Series. And that is something that you could look forward to, as I'm going to be talking about since we're getting closer and closer to, since we're right in the middle of March Madness. I'm going to be talking a lot of college basketball history as well as some NBA history, and plus some little sprinkles of football and other sports sprinkled in. So stay tuned, man. It's a never ending process, but it's a never ending process that I'm passionate about.
Well, it definitely shows in your show because it is full of entertaining topics. The music gives you that great vibe. Your transitions are excellent, and you really have some great programs on there. And it's worth everybody to, as soon as you get done here, go over there to Sports History Network and click on that Historically Speaking podcast and check out those episodes because they're definitely worth a listen. And I'm sure you'll want to subscribe to it just like I do to make sure you know as soon as they drop.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Post it, like I said, I'll drop every Sunday, and it's a show that is a labor of love for me. It's something I've always wanted to do, and sports history has been basically my lifelong passion and love ever since I was little.
Well, Dana, we really appreciate you joining us tonight, and we're going to have to make sure when we get off the air here, we're going to sign you up for some more numbers because you are definitely bringing some great points of view, some great history. And folks, a lot of this, I'm sitting here watching Dana this whole time. He's not really going off of notes or anything. A lot of what he's telling you is coming right off his brain, calling out all these old lineups of teams from the 50s and 60s. Really amazing. Your recall is just a great, and it shows in your passion for sports.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. That lends to the nickname my dad gave me when I was 10 years old. He used to call me Howard Cosell.
Okay.
If they have like a question, my dad would be like, go ask Howard. And be like, Howard who? Dana, but we call him Howard Cosell. When we talk about sports, call Howard. Yeah, he'll know.
Oh boy, your dad sounds like quite the character, with
one thing that I'm going to be putting together on the week of Father's Day, I'm having my dad and my godfather on because that's my dad and my godfather. My godfather is pretty much the one who introduced me to sports history, who basically told me, if you're going to be a sports fan, you need to know its history. And having those two on there, It's going to be a lot of fun for the listener, not so much me, because it's going to be hard trying to keep that show together with those two when they just try to keep them from arguing. So that's going to be a very entertaining show, to say the least.
Okay, listeners, if we already got some precursor that we know his dad's a Raiders fan, his godfather's a Giants fan. They like to have a little bit of a spat over that. So send your questions, DM Dana on his Twitter feed. Get some fuel for that fire, and we'll really make this an interesting show. We'll get the fandom going there.
Absolutely.
Well, Dana, I'm not going to keep you any longer. I appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us once again.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it.
Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, pigskinddispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskinddispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. A special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. At the Sports History Network, we're all about sports yesteryear, and so we're so pleased to introduce you to Row One, an online memorabilia gallery and shop that brings your sports history to life anywhere. The Row One gallery includes over 5,200 gorgeously reproduced prints of team posters, game program covers, game tickets, advertisements, and more in baseball, pro and college football, pro and college basketball, and more. And any gallery item may be printed in a variety of sizes on wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. And in Row One shop, check out the thousands more of unique items with the retro and historical designs dating back to 1876, including t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, phone cases, mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com, ROW1, for access to the full Row One catalog and for gallery prints and gift items, plus get a 15% discount off all prints on the Row One Pictorium Gallery with coupon code SHN15. Follow the link on the show notes.